Hello, media critique chic followers. This is Borderline Latina, and I am taking over. And as always, I'm here with the social critiques from a comedy freak perspective, which is informed by my experience, observation, research, theories, stats, etc., etc., etc. You get it, we've done this, so let's get into it. People are going to hate me for this episode. People are not going to like me for what I'm going to say in this episode. Maybe they won't. Most likely, they won't understand where I'm coming from. And what I despise the most is the inspiration for this episode, which is from the one thing I hate to do around this time of year, the start of a new year. New Year's resolutions. I do not like the idea of New Year's resolutions. Now, let me clarify and specify myself. I think it is perfectly great and normal for folks to want to start off the new year with a set of goals and strategies, especially if it's stuff that is like benefiting yourself, that's helping you to maintain your health and wellness. Especially and particularly when it is of your own doing, if that makes sense. If that is something that is inspired by you yourself, it comes from within, internally. My beef, my bone to pick with New Year's resolutions is the idea that, first of all, it makes me feel like it's a new year and I feel like I'm already behind. That I should be working on something. That I should be productive, right? It's like the new year started. We just finished an old year. Let's jump right into it. We got to do this, and this. This toxic productivity, this fact that we have to kind of constantly push ourselves to set goals, especially, and that's number two. Second of all, when it's informed by outside sources, when it's informed and conditioned and forced upon us by societal norms and values that define who we should be as opposed to who we actually are. So I'm talking about the whole, weight loss, exercise, all these things that people are kind of very highly persuaded to do, like at the beginning of the year. All right, it's the start of the new year. I need to join a new gym. I need to get the exercise routine. I need to lose weight. I need to eat healthy and all these things. Especially when it's conditioned us to kind of aim for these certain ideals which aren't realistic, which aren't healthy. Bodies come in many different shapes and sizes, and there's more to this idea of being healthy than this thick, skinny thing. So I don't like that. I don't like the idea that we're pressured to have these certain goals, right? That are defined for us by these highly problematic and toxic tropes of what it's supposed to be beautiful and doing well and being productive. We don't have to be productive, especially in the way that society is forcing us to be, especially if it's not in line with who we actually are, right? That is different to say, for folks who want to continue to take care of themselves, to treat themselves well, to treat their bodies well, to engage in movement, because movement and exercise and things like that in general does boost your mental and physical well-being if you're doing that in terms to maintain that type of health and wellness, not because this goal to be this insta model beauty queen type of stuff. So that's why I hate New Year's resolutions. But the inspiration of this episode did come from it. And the fact that I realize, or I'm beginning to realize, especially nowadays, that over the years, my I wouldn't say priorities, but my perspective, my experiences, my path, which would in line with whatever goals or intentions that I set for myself this year, are based on stuff that is very different from what a lot of, or dare I say, almost everyone around me in my current surroundings. So, what do I mean by this? So, I'm noticing, with this idea of New Year's resolutions, goals and things like that is usually in line with certain areas of your life. You think of your work, your home, life, etc. And for a lot of folks, that includes home life, includes family, which can include, when we're talking about family, nuclear family, not necessarily family of origin, although that could also be inclusive in this household. So nuclear family, you're talking about like your spouse and your kids or your kids. And family origin can also be part of that if you are in a household where you have your own family and then your family of origin, your parents and other relatives living into that thing. And so if you have a situation like that, obviously, the things that you need to concentrate on and prioritize around are inclusive of those factors. Right. So what I've noticed is that as I've grown older over the years, and especially the fact that I have lived in many different places, I've noticed that my sphere of thoughts and connection and things like that deal with factors that are very different from most people around me. I've gotten to the point in my life where the majority of people around me are married, and or in a long-term committed relationship, but almost all of them is marriage and kids. And I realize, I guess I should have known this, right? But because I guess I've taken a different path in life where, it is inclusive of having career, going to school and have careers, which is a lot of folks, right? Almost all the folks around me follow the same path, but I've done it independently. I've done it on my own. So it's just me, going to school, me going to work, me living in different states and engaging in this work. I didn't have to deal with a family or a spouse because I didn't have any and I still don't have any. But now as I'm noticing is that a lot of my spaces now that I interact with folks, socially or within work, are those that are included of people who have these families. And I've realized probably really late that at a certain point, people seek, or they get their meaning and their purpose in life, if we're talking about outside of work, from their family, their nuclear family. And so that everything that they kind of conceptualize and work towards and get meaning from and purpose from is out of that. And so that, permeates through everything, right? The conversations with people, how you see the world, how you have conversations with folks, what you kind of prioritize your time and your energy on, what do you think you're working towards of support of, right? So when I'll continue to have conversations with these people, there has been, and I've noticed this over the past years, that there has been this increasing barrier that I keep on pushing up against, to where I don't know how to find commonalities with folks that have these certain other aspects of their lives that I don't have. And so they could say the main things, you talk about connections with people, you talk about, TV shows, or like hobbies, right? So like maybe that could be music, TVs, books, things like that, right? And I think those are things that I can still have some connection with, right? Have you seen this movie? Have you listened to the show? Have you read this book? Have you heard of such and such things? Have you followed this particular person, famous person, significant person on certain topic and thing that we connect with and share in common, right? But I notice that it's less and less of conversations that are starting off from that standpoint, and more about like just hanging out with the family, right? And so I found it particularly hard, and I wish we could have more conversations about this. Because in the workforce, I feel like a lot of conversations in the in the social sphere, and also the workforce, is that a lot of these conversations are centered on. If you talk about what have you doing, what are you up to, it's centered on family, right? If you have a family, most of your conversations and things like that are conceptualized about what you've done with your spouse, what you've done with your kids, et cetera, right? And so those are the things that obviously I cannot chime in because I don't have those factors. And it used to be for a while like it didn't matter. It didn't matter that I didn't have those factors. Because I could listen. And I think for me, it's like, well, I'm not gonna pretend to make up a freaking family if I don't have, I don't have that, right? That'd be really hard to make. It wouldn't make any sense. And so I would listen, and for a long time, that was enough. Especially in the fact that it was like, these folks that had these nuclear families weren't the majority of the people that I was connecting with or having to interact with. And then slowly over time, I'm noticing that there's this more and more of this pull to engage in this conversation by sharing similar stories. And so that's when the distinction comes out, right? That's where the isolation comes into play, where it's like, it's not just enough for me to listen. And to, actively listen, paying attention, right? I can definitely find these stories entertaining and meaningful. But there's more and more this pull to engage, to talk about it. And so obviously you can hear that I hit against a wall because I can't talk about that. And so I'm realizing this kind of, well, it seems like I almost have to make a choice, right? Do I change the subject? Do I hang out with these people less? Do I try to find some sort of connection for staying? I tend not to do that because I just feel like if you're forcing something, right? Like if someone talks about, I don't know, family going to a soccer game, what am I gonna say? Oh yeah, I remember I used to love this TV show I watched where they did the soccer game, and it's like, what? Oh, they played with a dog. Oh, I watched the show with the dog. I saw the dog parade, or I don't even know. I think about those dog competitions that I see on TV shows or something like that. It's so forced. It's so forced. So why am I saying this? So I've noticed that a lot of times these start off the new year, these New Year's resolutions, their the goals or intentions and stuff like that are focused on these types of factors, right? And I'm noticing that I'm getting to a point in my life where, I mean, I don't want to be like, I'm doing great. But yeah, I mean, I have all these kind of, I am lucky and I acknowledge my privilege. I definitely acknowledge my privilege in this, that I am fortunate enough to be in a position where I can support myself financially, that I have my basic needs met. So, like food and shelter and taking care of my bills and all that stuff, having a job that I can depend on, that's going to continue to pay for me, pay for my needs and everything like that. So that's taken care of. And the work that I'm doing is good, right? So I'm good at what I'm doing. And that's all primarily in terms of career, right? So, how do you, as an individual, kind of make space for creating meaning and purpose outside of work? Now, just to say, it's not to say that I don't have any meaning or anything like that outside of work, or I haven't tried things or interested in things outside of work. I am definitely one of those folks that could probably categorize as like a workaholic. That a lot of my time is spent on my job. That I kind of think and conceptualize the world in terms of my job, or I should say my career, my field of study. And I've also noticed, and this is backed by science, that people who kind of form their identity based on their career, if something happens within their career or their job, it's like a devastating hit to their identity, right? So if something isn't working well in work, if it's stressed out or something like that, you internalize it as if something is wrong with you as a person. And I'm definitely very guilty of this and have been, and I'm being more intentional, especially over the past couple of years, of kind of differentiating myself, right? Like, I am more than what I do for others. Ha! I am more than what I do for others. That is a lovely, lovely one of the underlying, if you don't take anything else from this episode, it doesn't really have to do with this episode, but it actually kind of does, is that you are more than what you do, right? So how do you create meaning for yourself outside of what you do, if you're talking about like your job? But it can transcend. If you're talking about you're more than what you are, what you do for others, that transcends more than just your work. Like, for example, if you're in other role, like a parent. Hey, just want to use that one because it's a very common and easy example to explain. You are more than what you do for your kids, for your spouse, etc. Right? How do you create meaning for that? So I think kind of combination of New Year's resolution and this kind of me being more aware of like how do I create meaning and stuff like that. I'm definitely involved in hobbies and interests outside of work. However, I'm noticing, because we live in society that kind of puts a lot of weight and preference towards interests within the nuclear, or hobbies within the nuclear unit as opposed to outside of it, that my interests may seem kind of lower tier, right? Like, it's not something that can be satisfying in its own, which is sad. And as I'm kind of working on creating this balance of, not identifying myself solely on what I do as a career, not defining myself or putting weight on myself as, what I can do for others, which, if we want to talk about systemic bias, racism, prejudice, right, that folks of color, that's how we have been used by others, and how others put meaning and purpose of our lives is on what they can do, what we can do for them, right? Historically been this issue, historically been this terrible issue that outside people create meaning and purpose of us based on what we can do for them. And that leads to exploitation, taking advantage of, and learning in leading up to burnout and things like that, right? Because there's this pull for society, especially for folks of color, that we are meant to be in service of other people, primarily in work, but also in other areas of life. So I'm trying to pull away from that too, because I'm like, listen, I want to do this because I enjoy this. I don't want to be this person where people are just like, oh yeah, she's a great person because she can do XYZ. And then trying to build up my hobbies and my other things, interests, but then also kind of steering away from, or not being pulled into the stereotypical thing of like, well, you got low tier interests, right? It's not the same as like someone who is invested in their kid's soccer team. I don't know why I keep on talking about parents and kids and soccer team, but this is just a stereotypical thing. And before people start clapping back at me, I don't want to disparage or shit talk people who have families, working parents. I don't want to disparage or talk shit about them, right? Obviously, parents are great for society, working parents are awesome. That's not my life. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying because it is not my life, that I end up being outside of this bubble and almost as an outcast to society, because the expectation is, well, you should already be one now. And if you're not, your goal is to be one, right? That like, I'm kind of like in this in-between phase of like, well, she doesn't have this now, but yeah, she's gonna have this in the future, right? Because that's her goal, right? That's how she's gonna create meaning. Like, she's a working adult, but like, she doesn't have any family, like she doesn't have kids, like, but she's working towards that, right? So like, maybe she's not a full adult now, but like, eventually that's what's gonna happen, right? And I'm speed talking because it feels like this kind of antsy, like anxiety provoking pressure, but invisible pressure that other people don't even realize they're fucking putting on people. And that's not fair to me, because I definitely feel that other people see me as like less than an adult. There's often times where I question myself, am I a full adult? And I am lucky to have people in my life, my own family members, that are able to snap me out of that shit, because They're gonna like, what are you talking about? You do X, Y, and Z. You've been an adult and done adult things for several millions, even before you were an adult, right? But this idea keeps on feeling like I'm an adult because, I'm living independently. I don't have anyone else to take care of besides myself, right? So, why am I talking about this? Um, I just I think it's important for us to acknowledge and to have the voices of those like myself in similar positions where we're moving forward in our lives and we maybe end up reaching a certain age where, there's certain expectations for us, even though they may not be spoken or maybe they are spoken out loud. And if we don't fit into those categories, it's kind of like we're an outcast or we're less than. How do we create meaning for ourselves in the meantime? Or how do we continue to move forward, you know, in our lives in meaningful ways that have equal weight to those like in nuclear units, if that makes sense. Sometimes I feel like I question myself, like, are my hobbies and things enough? And then also I'm in the situation, which is why I want to talk about this, is that my hobbies and interests are good, but I'm still feeling like, not that they're not enough, or maybe there needs to be tweaking or something else. Does that make sense? Like, for example, music, you know, doing creative projects, things like that. I love doing that. And I want to be able to kind of create meaning and explore that avenue and see all the other possibilities that happen in those type of entertainment realms, right? In a way that is has just as much weight as other things, right? Like, and I want to say this, I'm gonna make it clear, right? That, let's just say that I'm leaving the door open. Like, for me, as I don't think, and this is personal for me, is I don't. It doesn't make sense for me to plan for something that isn't here yet, right? So why would I kind of plan for or orient my life and my being towards like a marriage if I'm not married, right? Why do I have to kind of work towards a goal of something that isn't there? Does that make sense? And to be honest, certain things like that aren't necessarily guaranteed. um if you don't have a partner right now, what happens if you don't have a partner for a while? What happens if you don't get married for a while? Or if ever, or if that's something that you don't want to do? Um, Sometimes I feel like we get forced by society, or ourselves, if we think that that's the only way for us to achieve happiness. It may not be something that we want to do, but we feel like we have to do. Um, I hope for us to kind of pull ourselves away from that, right? So I'm not saying that, for me personally, I'm not saying that I'm against having long-term relationships. That's not true. I definitely do want to have a long-term relationship, but I'm not in one now. So why would I, you know what I'm saying? Like, why would I try to stress myself out or try to push myself or pull myself in directions towards this long-term relationship if it isn't something that I have now, right? It makes sense for me to kind of live my life in the moment right now. And if and when that happens, that's a great thing. But there has to be other ways to sustain me outside of that. There has to be other ways to sustain me outside of that path. As I mentioned, that is something that I want. Right? So that there isn't really an answer to this question. But I notice that this is something that I'm having to navigate on my own, because, and not to say that there aren't people out in the world, because I'm pretty sure there's people out in the world who are in a similar situation like me, but I'm primarily surrounded by folks who aren't. And it's really hard for me because I can't have conversations about it, because I can't talk about it, because their mind and what they see the world is surrounded by factors and people in their life that I don't have. And it's hard for them to relate to me, to have those conversations, because I will always feel like, to them, whether they intend to or not, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to gel with somebody whose priority is like religion, family, and home life. If that's not you, right? You know what I mean? And it's hard for someone to kind of, and now if you have somebody that's open and willing to have that conversation or to give you space, I would love, maybe that's one of my resolution, but it's not a resolution because it's outside of my hands, but I would love for folks to create space for people like me to be able to explore this, because as scary as it is to not know what's in store for me or how I can create that type of me or move forward while having these things, I think it's exciting because it creates possibilities, right? Like, I'm here where it's like I'm able to define my life in the way that I want to. That's outside of what most other people are doing now. But I know whatever I'm going to end up finding is going to be awesome because it's for me. And once again, like the goal of, like I said, a long-term relationship, obviously that's something that's part for me, right? I should say obviously because it's not for everyone. Um, and if it happens when it happens, that's great, right? But I'm not going to kind of hold my life for that. I want to be able to live in the moment. So it's not a New Year's resolution, but for me, it's more of just thinking about how do I not reinvent the wheel, but how do I create and find additional opportunities for me to flourish, to create meaning and purpose in my life outside of work that doesn't have to deal with family. How can I continue to create possibilities and redefine things that are satisfying for me to create more opportunities for satisfaction and meaning that is outside of work and outside of nuclear family life? And for those folks who have those things, my hope is that they can create space for folks like me to explore and have those conversations and sit with it, right? Because as much as it is entertaining and things to hear about your life, so I think it's more entertaining to talk about like giving space for people whose stories and life path aren't the same as yours, and knowing that you can never understand what they're going through, but their thoughts and feelings and this path that they're going towards is just as valid. So those are my thoughts on that. And if it makes sense to you, that's great. And if it doesn't make sense, but you can think it makes sense for someone else, share it with somebody else. And there you have it. Messy, not really concluded ending, but an opportunity for growth and continuing to explore opportunities and continuing to build on making meaning outside of the toxic productivity, capitalist, supremacist, patriarchal culture. Onward. Well, this has been another rousing episode of Borderline Latina Takes Over. Until next time, y'all.